Good evening. All right, let's get this show on the road. Row on the show, whatever. Good evening, everybody. This is Neil, W2NDG, transmitting from a little hamlet of Elton Corners in the town of Lloyd in Highland, New York. Starting the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club's Sunday night Science and Technology Net. It is 8 p.m. Sunday night, and we join here every Sunday night to discuss science, technology, not always radio related, but tonight it will be partially radio related at least. And we'll have a little bit of kind of a poll and response night tonight. And going to thank in advance Mike KD2MNR for planting the idea in my head from one of his nets from a couple weeks ago. And we're going to talk favorites. In fact, I titled the net on Facebook, "These are a few of our favorite things." So we're going to talk about some of our favorite devices. So, yeah, we gather here all the time and discuss all sorts of things. We've kind of really spread things out a bit. We had a quantum physics discussion one night. We discussed cold a couple of weeks ago, and that cold isn't actually a thing. It's just the absence of heat. We've discussed space. We've discussed the radio spectrum. We've discussed radio, the basics of it, all sorts of things, and always looking for topics. If you have something you want us to take care of next week or the week after, you can always pop me an email or just suggest it on here. But anyway, we joined. We'll take check-ins in a little bit, but I am usually joined by my cohort, Jim, K2BHM. Jim, are you out there tonight?
Neil, I just looked in the mirror and I am here. I'm definitely sitting here, ready to go. K2BHM.
Well, if you can observe yourself, I think somebody else has to observe your presence for you to be actually there. So the question, if Jim transmits alone in the woods and nobody is around to hear the signal, is he actually there?
And does he need a license?
Yeah, there you go. If no one's going to hear you, do you need a license?
Don't try this at home. We're trained professionals.
Oh, there you go. Oh, yeah. You know, funny, a couple of things I'll bring up real quick. Little things I've observed over the last couple of days. For those of you who scroll around on HF a little bit, there is an infamous frequency on 40 meters. Infamous, notorious, I don't know, different ways you could put it. But 7,200 kilohertz. Definitely a gathering of people who probably shouldn't be licensed amateurs. But anyway, I think it was the night before last. Maybe it was last night, but somebody decided that they were tired of hearing all of the crazy banter that goes on there. So they decided to be a disc jockey. And as Jim said, don't try this at home, folks. Definitely not within the bounds of our license to sit there and spin the records. But whoever it was picking some good tunes. And it was kind of interesting to hear that on that frequency. But yeah, if you're going to transmit continuously for more than an hour, someone might find you. I don't know. Really bizarre, really odd, but it was actually a welcome thing to hear on that frequency than what usually is on there. So, what else? There was something else that came up. Let me see. Something that popped up in my Facebook memories, which is always one of those places where the craziest things always pop And I don't remember everything. I don't have that kind of memory. So sometimes I appreciate these little reminders that come up. Okay, this is what it was. 2 years ago, I had subscribed in Groups.io to Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. Those of you who don't know who Glenn Hauser is, shortwave listeners will read his newsletter, go to his Groups.io group, and before we had the internet, it was Glenn Hauser's World of Radio, which was his report on what was going on in shortwave radio. And it showed up on Radio Canada International and a number of other very SWL-centric shortwave stations. Glenn is still going, still publishing his newsletter, and still shows up on a couple of shortwave stations reading the news. But I had subscribed to his Groups.io group. It's interesting. And Google decided, because as Jim likes to point out to us once in a while, Google likes to read our email. Not everybody cares for that. I don't really mind. It's not a whole lot in there I really care whether Google reads or not. But Google decided, because of the emails that were coming in, because I hadn't chosen the digest yet. I was getting individual emails before I could get to a computer and knock it back. Google decided that I had booked a 3-day trip to a lighthouse in Iceland and put it on my calendar and emailed me an itinerary for my trip based on the World of Radio reports from Glenn Hauser. That's probably one of the craziest things that ever got wrong, but it does happen. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's ever been sent a strange itinerary from Google based on a couple of emails that it decided to observe. Anyway, I'm sure Jim has a comment on all this.
Yep. Would you like it now or later?
The digest version can be now. That's fine.
Well, going back to the original thought about the 7.2 banter going on, reminds me of a fellow I knew, Bill Ross, K2PVV, ran a 2-meter repeater in Chatham, and he was a bit of a cut-up, but he had some guys that he was listening to on 5.2 that were really cutting up. Let me drop a second. So he decided to get on there and be the traffic cop and tell them what they were doing was wrong and they need to stop it. And they proceeded to laugh at him and what are you going to do, old man, and stuff like that. So he took his kilowatt afterburner and stuck it on his 2-meter rig, set it for 5.2 because they were on simplex 5.2. And he told me he was going to shut the repeater down, and they said, you can't, it's simplex. But he took the output of his scanner, the white noise, set it into the mic input on his 2-meter rig, bumped it up to a full gallon, pumped it out for an hour, and basically nobody could do anything because he captured them. And with the white noise that he was transmitting, their squelches wouldn't unlock. So he basically shut down 5.2 for an hour and made them think that he pulled the plug on the repeater. So, yeah, that was a classic. Back to you, Neil, K2VHM.
W2NDG, the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. All right. Thanks, Jim. And, a couple extra minutes there before we take check-ins allows us to let people gather. So let's take check-ins first, and then I'll explain what the questions are going to be, and we'll start going around. So to check into the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net, you're going to give me your call sign, your name, and your location. Please come now.
This is KDJ 2, and then our Mike McGibson. Net control. Here is KB2 GGF, Matt Inkerhungsen. Net control. KB2 TVS, Blue, Westmount.
All right. Well, we'll start off with our group for now. So let me. Some of you were participating when Mike did this the other Saturday, including him. But I'm pretty sure Matt and Lou weren't there. But Mike asked. He was going to ask, "What is your favorite radio?" And he expanded it to, "What is your favorite communication device?" So I'm going to do that, but we're going to do a little back and forth on it as you tell me what it is. Now, there are two answers to this, and you don't have to answer both, but I'd like you to. So, first of all, what is a communications device for purposes of discussion? It really could be anything. It can be a radio. It doesn't have to be a transceiver. It could be, a walkie-talkie. It could be a receiver, a transceiver. It could be a couple of soup cans and a taut wire string. A communications device. Something made out of something we would, since this is the science and technology in it, a piece of technology used to communicate. So almost anything would fall under that label, but it's okay to just say radio, because I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite communications device or radio of your own? And it doesn't have to be something you have now. It could be something you used to own. But what is your favorite communications device of your own and of all time, which could be something you know somebody else has, something you saw, something you want and don't have. But favorite communications device or radio, and then two answers of your own, one that you have, and of all time. So I'm going to start with Jim, K2BHM.
Oh, wow. I have had so many things over the years. It's hard to pick out one that's the favorite and so forth and so on. And I've had the realm. Everything from soup to nuts. I mean, like when I was a kid, for Christmas one year, I got a set of G.I. Joe walkie-talkies. And they were no batteries needed. You put a wire between the two walkie-talkies, piece of zip cord or something like that. And it was just two speakers. And it was sound powered. The talking into the speaker of one made the speaker of the other one work. And you could talk back and forth with no batteries, no amplifiers, no nothing. Very simple. And then later on, when I started working for Trojan Electronics, I was utterly amazed to find out that RPI was running their football games with the coaches talking back and forth on basically the same thing, but a more professional version. So, utterly amazing. And let me drop a second. So we go from that aspect to the other end of the coin, where friends of mine, Judd K2CPA was the mastermind. We built up a remote base, 6 meters, 52525, 500 watts from 120-foot tower on top of about a 2,500-foot elevation location in Grafton. And we could put some pretty impressive signals out on 6 meters. And then he actually went and set up an array, and we set up some equipment on, I think it was 432. And we did moon bounce.
I remember those walkie-talkies that didn't need a battery. Do you remember the ones that had basically like a clear piece of medical tubing or whatever it was between them?
No, I had the advanced version. Mine had a pair of 22 gauge zip cord went between them, and they were good for 20 feet or so.
I remember seeing ones when I was little that basically just had like a tube, and basically is the equivalent of when you're watching these old submarine movies, and such, with the guy pulling the hose down out of the ceiling. It's like engine room full ahead. But yeah, that's cool. I remember those, and yeah, it's when you yell, because in some cases, even though the other one was 20 feet away, you really did have to create some volume to make it work. When you yell into a carbon microphone element, it does produce some voltage.
It's got to be minuscule because they were basically a variable resistor.
Interesting. I remember it was one of the experiments in one of those early electronic kits I had, is that they had you hook the microphone up to the meter and yell at it, and you get a little bit of deflection.
Yeah, it had to be millivolts because a lot of the commercial radios, the Motorola's, GEs, and RCAs and stuff like that, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they use carbon mics because you could put a 12-volt bias on it and get a high-level signal out, and you didn't have to worry about ignition noise and all that other kind of stuff getting into your signal. It was high enough that it was pretty impervious.
That's the other end of it. But yeah, I mean, when we're dealing with things like crystal receivers, you're dealing with, definitely with things in the millivolt range. But it's interesting where you can actually pull energy out of. All right, Jim, thanks. Mike, KD2MNR, I know you already answered this for us once, but we can do a little back and forth here on it. So, favorite radio or communications device of your own, and favorite of all time throughout history.
In all my years of ham radio, well, no, I have to say, I went to Connecticut School of Broadcasting, so they had a lot of cool stuff there to play with. But as far as with my ham radios, I think I have and this is a many-part question because of what the different radios will do. Like my ID 5100, that is my favorite dual-band radio. My 578s that I have everywhere, those are my favorite DMR radios. The 7300, that is my favorite HF radio. There are other radios. There's a couple other radios that I would like to end up with, and actually, I know that a bunch of people have said to steer clear of the 9700, the ICOM IC79 or 9700, but when Linda gets her license, what she wants to do for ham radio, let me drop for a second. KD2MNR for ID. The 9700 would be perfect for what she wants to do. It actually, with slow scan TV, you can actually look at the picture on the radio itself and then send it out. She wants people on the ground while she's at Command Central looking for, earthquake victims, that couldn't get out of the house. Mainly she's looking at it for their pets. So, you put somebody, tornado, whatever it is, whatever disaster it is.
But, now she's looking into drones and stuff like that too. But let's just stick with the radio portion of it for now. But yeah, so, that radio would be another aspect of ham radio for her to get into. So, like I said, there's many different aspects of a favorite communication device. Smoke signals are good too. So I'll turn it back to you, Neil. KD2, MNR.
No, that's fine. When you first asked the question on your net, it was difficult for me to come up with an answer at first because I was thinking about the radios I had as a kid. And when I really thought back on it, I thought, okay, so of all the different radios I had as a kid and as a young man and as a shortwave listener and as a ham radio operator, which one brought me the most joy, when I first got it and continued over the years. And, that's when, I really thought about it a lot. And it was a toss-up. It really was. But, it was a tough decision between the Sony I mentioned, which I'll get to when we get through everybody, and my first shortwave radio that our family friend had given me, because that was the eye-opener. That was the radio that made me realize that I could listen to all these countries all over the world. And, when I tuned way down to the bottom of the bands on the second one that I had, and, you would hear these guys that sounded like Donald Duck. And it was my first, introduction to what sideband was. And I didn't have anything I could decode it with until I discovered that if I took the two shortwave radios I had and put them next to each other, I could simulate a BFO and start clarifying some of those. So it was the wonder of those days kind of makes me think that those were the radios, but I picked a newer one. But definitely a lot of stuff out there. Are you saying the 9700 is your favorite all-time device? Whether you have it or don't have it or haven't had one?
No, it's one that I would like to get. With favorite all-time, a lot of people are going to think this is funny, but my father was always into CBs, and he got me into CBs. And we used to talk to different countries on his Uniden Zachary T from his house, which is, out by H.O. Penn off of Knoxon Road. And we were up high, and we just got out, and we used to talk to other countries on it. It was a very nice radio. It was an old radio, but I'll tell you what, they worked. Not a lot of power, but it worked. Very nice radio. And it was like I said, it was the Zachary T, I believe. And it didn't have sideband. It was just a 40 channel. And, we used to listen to different countries and stuff. And finally we started, talking to them. But, so that was a very nice radio. But I got to say, all time, I love my 7300.
Well, I'm glad. I like mine too, but when I just think about, the various revelations and, opening the box, trying something out for the first time, and the years that I've had them, it's not number one on that list. It's very close. All right. Thanks, Mike. Matt, KB2GGF, you know the questions. Let's hear your answers.
Okay. At present, my favorite communications device is my Jigu G1M. It's a simple little QRP radio, but does everything it needs to do really well. And I don't know, I just like it. And of all time, it's sort of a fantasy thing and whimsical, but my all-time favorite communications device is the interocitor from this island to Earth, which is a very complex communications machine, which is sent to a scientific instructions on how to build it. And he and his partner at the lab build it, and when they turn it on, they meet Exeter, the alien, who tells them, "Hey, congratulations," And a whole bunch of flying saucer stuff happens, and it's really a pretty cool movie. But the Interrupter was, I was very impressed by that. Back to that KB2 GGF.
Great answer, Matt. Silly Earthlings. I like that. And for those of you who don't know what a Xiegu G1M is, it is a neat little radio. I like to build stuff and tinker and everything, but for the money, it's a little tiny 4-band radio, like the size of a small paperback book. And it's very, very capable. And it's based on the same SDR technology they've used to create the G90. So it even has I believe it has a tiny, not incredibly useful for its size, but tiny waterfall display. So it is a cool little radio. And I had an X1M, the predecessor to that, which was not SDR based, but I made a lot of good contacts on that little thing. It's definitely a company to watch as they evolve. They keep coming up with better and better stuff. Cool stuff, Matt. And I'm glad you didn't mention a device from Robot Monster or Plan 9. Lou, KD2 TVS. Favorite communications device that you own or are familiar with, and favorite device of all time anywhere? Communications.
Evening, Neil, and everybody else. That night. There's been conversations not only with radios at all. I'm going to warn you because I've only been in the hobby the thing. So, I guess like everybody that with radios that you're I don't think it was a personal that was because I was like, yes, I was in Transistors. As I was reading this book, there was really studying about the computer and codes and all that stuff. So it was a way for me to learn how to do all that stuff. So I would probably say that's one of my tools, I guess. Stepped up to after. But also, what I enjoyed playing with, let me reset, is one of those little RTL SDR dongles, and I was playing with those in the beginning too, just listening in. I just needed to listen to them, see that I could, dial in and tune in and find people talking all over the place. So, which was interesting. So that was a favorite of mine. I still got it. I know it's in a box up here on the shelf. But I'll probably one day plug it in and start playing with it again, or get a fancier one. But and as far as that would be my probably two favorites, I guess, because those were the beginning of my my ham radio hobby. Graduated from that. 150. The other one came to watch on it, and 2980. So I liked all of them. And I got to learn about a Linko too. I have an Linko ER135, which I kind of like too. So I would say that I have a diehard favorite, but I guess that SDR is about me for the beginning of everything. Let me just reset. Yeah, other than my career playing, having radios on the job, I remember I got to see from back in the late 70s what I guess they were the old Motorola bricks that we used to carry around just to, keep in touch with each other every time we were working outside. And seeing the evolution of them as they went to digital, I guess DMR and all that stuff. And how you could now just like everybody with just on one channel
rain and come back in the afternoon. So I always wanted to keep an ear out for the traffic. So I remember I bought a CD radio. I can't remember what brand it was. I remember it had an 8-track in it. It was a combo of an 8-track and CD radio, and I would put it on in the car just to listen to. I don't even remember the channels for the southern state, northern state, and the Party State Parkway, or Long Island Expressway was the other one. I don't remember the channels, but I remember just listening to them on the way to try to beat in the traffic in the afternoon, coming back in city and Manhattan at the time, or going out to Long Island at the point. But that's pretty much it. I'll stand on the side and listen to everybody else's story.
No, that's fine, Lou. And your first HT could very well be your favorite radio because that's a foot in the door of our hobby. It definitely opens up a lot. And I think my first HT was definitely an eye opener for me, but it became quickly apparent with mine that I had chosen probably the wrong one. When I got my license, the UV5Rs weren't out yet. And the dual band stuff was, at the time, I was trying to stretch the almighty dollar as far as it would go. So, most of the dual band stuff, the early Wokshun radios were still up around $100 or more. And I really didn't want to spend $100 on my first radio. So today, it's funny. I would, laugh at that, but, at that point in my life, it was definitely something to consider. So I bought an FDC 150, which was a 2-meter handheld, 5 watts. And FDC was the Fpgas company of China. Not a great radio, but it did get me into a couple local repeaters, and with a better antenna, it got me into the repeater that would eventually introduce me to the club that I got involved with down on Long Island when I got my license. And really is where, all my ham radio knowledge and my exposure to the community and, what got me to this point. So, but yeah, I don't like the radio. I run across it every now and then in one of my bins. I haven't gotten rid of it for that same reason that it was the first one, but I don't know. It probably is going to need a battery if I run across it again. But yeah, it definitely has a place in my heart. But it was really not a very good radio. All right, Lou, thanks. We've been asking the questions. Let me see if we have any late check-ins before we go to the next question. But if you'd like to check into the OMARC Science and Technology Net tonight, and we were expanding on Mike's question from a couple weeks ago, what's your favorite communications device that you own or have owned, and what is your favorite communications device of all time? Out in the world, maybe something you've wanted, something that existed and you can't get anymore. It doesn't matter. Something you don't have, but could be something you have as well. Favorite device of all time, favorite device you own or have owned. So please, if you want to check in and answer the questions, come now with your call sign, your name, and your location. All right. Thanks, Paul. And you got the questions. So go ahead. Tell us what your favorite communications device that you own or have owned is. And what's your favorite device of all time in all history?
Well, I don't have the whole fun now. That's the fun part about this radio. Let's see. What do I got? I don't know. I think my Icom 745 is probably one of the earliest radios I ever got. And I still got the thing, and I like it.
seems to work fine. It's only sideband CW, really. I didn't get any of the AM stuff or FM stuff. Anyway, it's a favorite. I still got it. Still plug it in. Still use it. I don't know. Toss up between that and ICOM 706. 706 is kind of clumsy, so it's like, I don't know. All time, I'm going to say the computer. With a modem and the internet and the whole 9 yards. The things I've been able to do with communications with it, voice over IP, DMR, decode DIM, all the digital modes on the amateur radio, including CW. Oh, I don't know. I think that just blows everything away. And 3
And what a great answer to the question, because I can think back to the first time I got my computer online with a modem. And, before the internet, logged into a BBS service and was able to, leave messages for other people. The forerunner of email. I'm sure Jim will have something to say about that. Because, that's how it worked then. You would post a message on your local BBS, and then at night the BBSs would dial each other up and send the messages out into the world, and they were routed that way. So it would go, through multiple BBSs before it got to its destination. There were multi-node BBSs, where people had computers that were fast enough to run, more than one session. And you had to have an operating system that could deal with it as well, or multiple computers, linked with serial ports, or and if you logged into a multi-node system, you could chat with the other user. And then the first online systems, Bix, Genie, CompuServe. These were all text mode, huge online systems where there were forums and storage archives and news, and definitely the forerunner to the internet. And it was that first couple of times that you dialed up another computer and it connected, and you were using somebody else's computer from your screen and your keyboard. Today it doesn't seem like much, does it? My first experience with the internet was my roommate and I. I was in my early 30s, I guess, sharing an apartment with a friend of mine who was into technology, and we went to visit his brother-in-law in Rochester, who was, deeply into technology as a career, and he had internet. It was a new thing for us. Pretty wild too, and I think he was running the Spyglass browser, which was a derivative of the original NCSA Mosaic, like so many of them were. And, that was early days of the World Wide Web. And it was amazing, especially to someone like me, a self-described information addict. You ask the world a question and get an answer. And then, of course, I, started looking into getting it at home. Homemade computer, phone line, 14.4 modem, later a 28.8 modem, and UlsterNet. So, neat stuff, and a great answer, Paul. Thank you for that one. All right, let me drop and just throw it back up to Jim for any wrap-up comments on the first round here.
Hey, OK2BHM. Yeah, you're bringing back memories. For me, up in Albany was Logical Net. When they first started, it was 300 baud, and then eventually got to 1200, and then a little more than that, whatever. And there wasn't much up there. Everything was all text-based, no graphics or anything like that. And it was amazing, but today you look at it as like crude. And first walkie-talkie I ever played with. My dad had a World War II surplus walkie-talkie. And if you look at Hogan's Heroes, you'll see them using it all the time on the show. Large thing about the size of a Thuris bottle. It was 80 meters, vacuum tube, crystal controlled. And I think it put out about a watt or so on AM. No squelch. Ran off batteries. I think, if I remember correctly, there was like a 6-volt A battery, and I think it might have been like a 22 or 45 volt B battery, and C was like 135 volts. By the time Dad got them, he couldn't get the batteries anymore, so he put a little connector in the bottom and had a power supply ran up 110, and we would play around with that. But anyhow, yeah, technology definitely marched away over the years. Back to you, K2BHM.
Yeah. The early days of portable electronics. Okay. I had somebody log into the YouTube chat here under the name of Radio and Electronics Engineering. It's KC2NDA. Aaron from right over here by me. And he was posting his favorite, one of his favorite devices was I don't know if it's pronounced POCSAG or POCSAG, but POCSAG pager decoder he bought in the 80s. It was featured in Electronics Now magazine. One of his favorite pieces of electronics. And I can imagine at the time that must have been really interesting to intercept all that pager data. And he mentioned the Hack RF, one of his favorite communications devices. And for those of you unfamiliar with that, the Hack RF is a very broadbanded SDR that I believe it transmits and receives, but it's not designed to be used as, let's say, a ham radio transmitter, because you have to add components to be able to use it for something that's specific, like filtering and possibly an amplifier. But it's a very flexible, very useful transceiver that you can use to intercept almost any type of communication, and the other side of the coin interact with that communication. And the basis of many communications projects, when we first started with these weather stations, and Jim figured out the software for intercepting the signals from those, it's things like that. You could build a device that would hack tire pressure sensors with one of these, or various things like that. It's definitely a cool piece of technology, and thanks, Aaron, for bringing that one up. All right. When we send it back up to the top here, the next question, and there are 3 questions tonight, so we'll try to do 3 rounds. The next question is, what is your favorite new technology of all time? And it doesn't have to be new now. New technology could have been the transistor. But it could be a new technology that just came out. But what new technology of all time really made you say, wow, whether it was something you could get involved in or not? What is your favorite piece of new technology where the announcement really got you and you wanted to sit down and learn everything you could about it? So let's roll back up to Jim. Jim, what is your favorite piece of new technology that you ever heard of and wanted to know more about?
Oh, God, again, there's so many. But probably the most memorable is when I was a kid, I used to get the Popular Electronics magazine, and they were coming out with all kinds of articles on building this, building that, a radio, a mic amplifier, so forth and so on. And my dad was old school, vacuum tubes. They rule the world. These engineers playing around with these little grains of sand, yeah, they're interesting little play toys, but to really do some work, you need a vacuum tube. And that's what I grew up with. And so now all of a sudden I'm building stuff out of the magazine with transistors like CK722s from Raytheon and 2N107s from GE and stuff like that. And it's not working. And I not really knowing what's going on. So I'm looking for help. Hey, drop a second. Well, Dan knew all the theory and all that, but he didn't have a clue on what those little magical grains of sand did. So I would have to take the circuits, convert them from transistors over to tubes, ask the question, get the answer, convert it back to transistors again, and then from that point, figure out what was wrong with the circuit. Oh, okay. They said it's a 1K resistor. It's supposed to be a 1 meg resistor. Oops. Change it. It works. And then 2 months later, you see in the oops column, R103 was supposed to be 1 meg instead of 1K. Sorry. So that's probably the thing that made the biggest impression on me. And then, of course, from that, it progressed into ICs and stuff like that, computers and so forth. But that was, I think, for me, the game changer, going from hollow state to solid state. Back to you, Neil, K2VHM.
It's a good answer. I think I've told you this before, but I always love this. It's one of my favorite things I've ever put on the wall over my desk at work. I usually put something there just to attract interest, but it's an ad. Not really an advertisement, but it's from a electronics journal from I guess the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s. I'm not sure the exact date, but it's an ad from I believe it's either the RCA company or General Electric, and it says, "Are you prepared for the high cost of miniaturization?" And it shows transistors and a micro peanut tube, and it talks about how much more expensive transistors are to use in place of the tried and true tubes that we all know and love. And it's an anti-transistor ad, and it's pretty hilarious. It really is. Yeah, I can try to find a copy of that ad for anybody who wants it. I found a PDF of it at some point, and it's really cool. All right, so next on the list, Mike, for our technology question. What was your favorite new technology of all time?
Quick comeback.
So go ahead.
I had my favorite poster over my desk when I worked at the federal government. It said, "This isn't Burger King. You'll get it my way."
Before we go to Mike, I'll say the one that used to sit there was a guy holding a monitor high over his head, about to bring it down on somebody else who was standing in front of him. And it says, "You are being monitored." Mike, go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I got to go with the cell phone. Ham radio was already around. CBs were already around. Smoke signals have been around. So new technology in my lifetime, I have to go with the cell phone. It seemed pretty cool, and it kind of still is. And I think that everybody thinks so because you watch people driving down the road on their cell phone, and with all of it's very funny because all of the apps that are out there, and you can play video games on your cell phone, and you can look up the weather on your cell phone, and go on the internet on your cell phone, and then you realize, oh yeah, this is a phone also. Wow, that's pretty cool. So I got to go with the cell phone.
No, it's a good answer. And I can remember, the idea of the cell phone wasn't crazy impressive to me. I mean, it was definitely impressive, but knowing ham radio, having a member of the family that was into it, and knowing mobile phone technology existed, it did. It was definitely not as sophisticated as cell phones. It made sense to me. It was one of those things that when it came out, I was like, oh, finally. But it was definitely cool. But an excellent answer. And obviously, cell phone technology has had a huge impact. When we talk about all these different technologies that are our favorite, I can almost guarantee you that every single one of these will have a huge impact on society, or did have a huge impact on society at some point. And that's a common denominator here. All right, Matt, what's your answer? I'm waiting for something out of a sci-fi movie again.
Thanks, Neil. No, this is a lot more down to earth. I'm not an early adapter of technology usually. Like cell phones, I didn't have one until 1999. And, they were around a lot earlier than that. But so far as new technology, the one that I'd have to say in my life that I like the best, and I was an early adopter of, was the Walkman. I always had headphones on when I was a young man, and I really enjoyed being able to listen to what I wanted to listen to without advertisements on my Walkman. So that's my answer. Back to that. KB2, GG.
No, it's a good answer. And the Walkman is really, the grandfather of the iPod, which really, in many ways, changed how we consume entertainment and music. I say entertainment because it really led to the way that we do almost everything with entertainment now, not just music, but video. And those of us that had, the cassette Walkman and a good cassette deck at home would make our mixtapes and go out there into the world. God, I had a library of them. I had a really good tape deck eventually, and I always had decent ones, but eventually I invested in a real high-end 3-head deck and good quality blanks. And I used to make really good cassettes. And the other thing that the Walkman brought us was the miniaturization of these devices. Matt, I don't know if you remember, but do you remember the Sony? There was the F10 and the F10 II Walkmans, which were the Walkmans that were not more than a hair larger than the plastic cassette box that you put a cassette in. Do you remember those?
No, I don't, but I remember the ones that could record.
I had, I think it was the second generation of those tiny cassette box size ones. I think it was the F10 II. And it had a little tiny FM radio in it as well. But you're not just talking about miniaturization of electronics. When the Sony engineers had to design these, they had to shrink the mechanicals of this thing down to something that size. And it was just amazing. And they ran off of one AA battery, which was also just incredible if they were able to get the whole thing to work that way. But they also sounded good. I mean, it was early modern headphone technology, but they had some really good over-the-air lightweight headphones, and the devices sounded good. Pretty neat. Another comment from Aaron that popped up here, and this relates back to Jim's talk about transistors. He says, as transistors get smaller, the voltage decreases, the frequency increases, and the switching current increases. This is where most of the waste comes into play with transistors. So, and when we talk about that type of technology, there's been a number of times in my life when I've heard them say, we can't make this any smaller. There's a physical limit coming. They'll talk about in a year or two that they won't be able to get around, and they always get around it. One of the things that I mentioned, I think in another net or somewhere else, but one of the things that's coming, and I think it's already possible, but they're still trying to refine the technology to make it practical. But they're going to be able to 3D print the actual components, like the chips and the capacitors and the resistors, along with the boards that they're on. So we can 3D print at the molecular level. It is possible. I had a guy speak to our group at the hospital, I think 6 years ago about this. He was printing drugs by 3D printing molecules. We should, in the near future, be able to 3D print these circuits, which is going to make manufacturing really interesting. Prototyping. So it's a lot of interesting ideas here, and we can go on. Lou, what new technology, and could be new old technology, or old new technology would probably be the correct way to say that. I should have dropped here. I was going to go with Lou next, but let me drop. I'm pretty sure we got most of what I said. All right. Lou, what new technology, and it can be old new technology, is your favorite? What impressed you the most when you heard about it, read about it, etc.?
Okay, Neil, I would have to say, the funny thing with working on airplanes, seeing things are way decided, how much technology comes from aviation and space travel, back into the field. But the biggest one I saw was GPS. I remember working on airplanes, the Ford and the 11, and those things had navigation. INS, actually, the INS was on the Apollo spacecraft. They came from originally before they put them inside like some Fords and I love it. Let me just reset. But I remember, the beginning of GPS and aircraft, and then surprisingly getting on your phone. I remember when we had cell phones, and all you could do was make a phone call, and that was it. With all these apps now, you used to have a separate little display there for the. I still have one floating around somewhere in the apartment. Or the other one that used to go, and just to get around. I thought that was fascinating back then, because I remember I had to make a trip from Houston to here in Jersey, and my phone didn't have GPS on it at the time, and I had to stop by at a Walmart and actually pick up a GPS unit, so I wouldn't have to be looking at maps all the way home. But I think that's probably the biggest thing I can probably say that I've seen in technology and GPS, how simple it is, and and how it works and everything, like compared to and how much of an advance it gave the aviation gave me. We get airplanes from one spot to another within 3 years, and how the military actually started all that, and it came over to the commercial side, and then the public components and stuff like that. So I would have to say GPS is back to you, Katie, GPS.
Thanks, Lou. And another great answer. And I'm glad we're getting different answers here, because, all of these are good. GPS, oh, definitely. When you think of all the different industries it touches, and it touches our hobby, not just for location, but as a time standard. Some of these radios I've been working with in building one in particular, which I can grab and hold up to the camera here. The QRP Labs Hans Summers QCX series of radios have a whisper mode. You can set them up as a whisper transmitter. And one of the things, if anybody has watched my digital modes talks I do for HRU, one of the important things when you're doing these modes, whether it's FT8 or whisper or JS8 call, is time synchronization. And you get a device like this out in the field and you don't have a real time clock in it, you need a time standard. And that's a good way to get one anywhere. Pull one out of space. Cool answer. And you mentioned some cell phone stuff. When I think of early cell phones and how it relates to GPS, I think the first phone I owned that I was really aware of the fact that it had working GPS in it was one of my early Blackberries. I got a Blackberry when I worked at my first IT job in Manhattan. And there were some early navigation apps for the BlackBerry world. And most of the better ones were paid apps. You had to buy them. But there was a free one I found. It was actually, I think it was English. It was from across the pond. And it was funny because it did know our roads, but it didn't know them so well that every now and then there would just be some funny generic direction it would bark out. And it had a British accent. And when I went more than 2 miles an hour over the speed limit, it would say, pay attention, in this rough, deep British voice. But when I made that jump from that place to working at AOL corporate, we were still issued Blackberries, but we all got to run the commercial version of MapQuest for free because AOL owned it. So I got rid of my cranky British navigator. But neat stuff and great answer. All right, let me drop. This is Neil, W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. Next up is Paul, Enter EYQ. Paul, favorite technology of all time?
I don't know. Years ago, I used to have to be on call. And I'm going to call it the cell phone. Or something similar to that. It just freed me from sitting at home, sitting by the landline because I was on this extra board. And you had to wait for a phone call, to come in and all this other garbage. And, what people do now with a cell phone, like just turn everything upside down, turn it right around. Years ago, in 1985, 86, I subscribed to a system that there was a pager and a UHF radio with a touch tone pad on like 453 megahertz. So I bought myself a radio that operated on 453, and we had auto patch and the whole 9 yards, and you can make business calls on it because it's commercial. Unlike amateur stuff. So it's like, you had all that stuff in amateur stuff. You couldn't do commercial stuff, and of course, back then I was in the Navy, and we had our duty stations, and we're on call for the weekend. And, they just, all right, just hit the pager. I'll be there. I'll give you a call. If I'm not by the phone, and I call them up on the on the auto patch on the UHF repeater. I'm going to say that was mine.
All right, and it's a good answer. When we think of the freedom that that device has given us, the ability to pick up and go somewhere else, and it allows me to work from a picnic table in the middle of a forest, and during the pandemic, I did a little bit of that when my job suddenly shifted to work from home and realized how much I could actually work from home. I got creative with it some days. So, but yeah, it's a great answer. We have a couple from Aaron here, and yes, Mike, you may secure. Mike's going to go to bed, so we won't catch him on the third round. Aaron gave an answer that for me would have been a tough answer for me. Definitely one that I agree is something that is not just changing our hobby, but changing the world of communications, and that's software-defined radio. SDR, as computers or the ability to compute in devices gets more and more able, as system on a chip type of technology is more and more apt to handle more and more things at higher and higher speeds. We can emulate whole devices that existed in hardware before, and now they exist in software. And that's what SDR is. And one of the devices I keep raving about is this new kit that I'm waiting on. I'm going to build the micro SDX, which is the official released version. The true SDX is somebody that took one of these microcontrollers, not even a full-fledged microprocessor for a computer, but a microcontroller, and managed to shoehorn enough SDR technology into it to make a transceiver the size of a pack of cigarettes, multiband, sideband, CW, you name it. And this is where it's going. And SDR is completely changing what we can do with communications devices, because it's all about software. We how many of us have these IC 7300s, and every time there's a firmware release, they get better. There's so much we can do with this stuff. And that's a great answer from Aaron. He added later on, he said he was going to add FPGAs, and the basis of like an SDR device he's talking about are these small processing devices. And I'm running on here, W2NDG for the OMARC Science and Technology Net. Aaron mentioned FPGAs and the Raspberry Pi in particular. And he says, Jim will agree. And we know that. And so, as will I. I'm a huge fan of these system on a chip based computers and little tiny credit card size computers. And it's not just, as I was just saying, not just about the hardware, but also about the software. All right. So let me talk about my choices here, because I never really gave you the one from the last round either. My favorite communications device or radio that I've owned is, for those of you watching on YouTube, it's right over my left shoulder here. And it was a tough choice. Like I said, the first shortwave radio I ever got is a contender, the Panasonic RF2200, which I think Radio J. Allen still lists in his shootout list as the best radio of all time. I owned one of those. And there's a lot of things that could fill those shoes. But this is a Sony Icf 2010. This one is actually, if you were to look at the model on it, it's an ICF 2001D, which is the European version of the ICF 2010. But this is a radio that was so good that it existed in Sony's line for 17 years. I mean, how many pieces of consumer electronics do you know that were made for that many years? That's how good it was. It does things that no other shortwave multiband radio could do. I've owned a couple of them over the years. I sold my original one when I was kind of not listening to shortwave so much for a while, and regretted it immediately, and looked for used ones. Now I can't say I collect them. Probably better description of what I do is I rescue them. And those of you on YouTube, I'm holding up another one here. I currently own 4 of them. 3 of them need service of some kind. And I've done this before. I bring them in, I fix them up. Either I do the repairs or I send them off to somebody to do them if they're beyond my ability and time. But I've always, looked to keep the best one, at least in my view. And the one that I kept is one that wasn't cosmetically the best, but performance-wise, it had the best sound and the best sensitivity. And because I really don't care what it looks like so much, and I'm going to hold it up to the camera again here. If you'll notice, the battery door does not match in color. It's because it was 3D printed. This one came without a battery cover. But when I sent a bunch of them out to one of the repair guys, he told me that this was one of his favorites of all the ones that I sent him. And I made this one my permanent resident in the office here. And what a great radio. Really, really good radio. That's the Sony Icf 2010. And you'll see them on eBay going for anywhere from $100 to $500, depending on accessories and condition. So anyway, all right. Aaron, I'll get to that in a minute. He's asking me to share a link. I'll explain why that's not an easy answer. So that's my one answer. My favorite communications device of all time is the crystal radio. And it's just the extreme simplicity of it and the fact that it works, that you can take 3 components, basically, I guess 4 if you can include the earphone, if you want a tunable one. So a diode, a coil, a tuning capacitor, and an earphone, and listen to radio stations. No power, no battery. It pulls the energy out of the air and creates sound. Yeah, you got to sit in a pretty quiet room, but you can make some pretty sophisticated crystal radios. You can get ones that are much louder in volume. There's all sorts of groups and clubs that make these radios that don't require power, that just pull radio waves out of the air and create sound out of them. And I just love the idea and the simplicity of crystal radios, and the fact that you can still make them, you can still expand on them, you can still apply the technology to them, and they still get better sometimes. People have come up with ways to make them even better. So definitely neat stuff. Let me drop. I think, because I'll give Aaron SDR, I think the 2 technologies that were announced in all of my years that made me the most, wow, that's really cool. One was the compact disc. And it was because I didn't know much about digital audio and analog to digital conversion. When I first read about the compact disc and how it worked, it really amazed me. The fact that it was this thin piece of foil sandwiched between plastic, like a small record, that had tiny little pits burned into it that a laser beam would read, and those pits were basically ones, and the absence of the pits were zeros, or however it was encoded, it was reading ones and zeros off of a spinning disc. And then it would take those binary numbers and convert them to sound. To me, it sounded amazing, because to me, the idea of digital music would tell me, it said to my teenage brain, well, that means it would be perfect. Now, of course, we know that that's not the case. There were, conversion issues and oversampling and all sorts of other, tricks they did to make them sound better. And a lot of it was in the conversion. Some digital albums, early CDs that were converted from analog records, were very good. Some were awful, grating on the ears, terrible recordings. And I got to I got to experience both ends of that. So some of my favorite vinyl didn't sound as good on CD. But then again, some of it sounded amazing on CD. Albums like Peter Gabriel's Security was just a fantastic CD when it came out. Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, another one. A little bright, and it turned the high end down a little bit, but just so well recorded. And then some of them, one of the first compact discs released from analog recordings was Fleetwood Mac's Greatest Hits, and it's also one of the worst CDs ever made. Definitely remastered and redone later. You'd probably have a tough time finding the original poor one. But the CD was definitely something that made me sit up and take notice. And when I first read about it, they were still arguing over whether they were going to make it a 5-inch disc or a 12-inch disc. Sony's idea was the smaller one, and Philips wanted something the size of an LP, because they said, hey, we're already storing things that size, so they can use the same storage furniture they currently have. But yeah, the technology was co-developed by Philips and Sony, and they ended up using Sony's physical design. So, but of course now CDs to our kids, are kind of like how I looked at 78s when I had my record collection. But yeah, the CD. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. There was a communications device that the announcement of made me say, it kind of gave me that same level of amazement that the CD did as a teenager. I forget how old I was. I was not that old, but I was getting Elementary Electronics magazine and Popular Electronics. And there was an ad one month for a scanner called the Tenelec. And the Tenelec scanner was the first programmable scanner. And what was different about that, not just that it was programmable, was that, it had a keypad. You could type in the frequency you wanted to listen to. Everything we had was analog, and the stuff that was digital readout was just analog with a digital readout. This was something different. This was frequency synthesis. And there were a couple companies that made early programmable scanners. Bearcat had one that didn't have that type of programming. It used a weird binary type of programming, but the Tenelec was one of the first ones with a keypad. And you could punch in the frequencies, but the thing that it talked about, which just made me say, oh my God, this is fantastic for a radio guy who just wanted to listen to whatever there was out there, is that it would search for frequencies. Today we don't think anything of this, but to however old I was when that came out, that was amazing to me. Some more comments from Aaron here. Said, fun fact, Laserdisc came out before CDs. Well, there were video discs before CDs, which were interesting. Laserdisc in 78. I'm going to have to look into that. The technology, was there. They were footballing it around for a while back and forth, but it's possible. But there were video discs that were not laser discs. They modulated the video into a couple of grooves, and it was a multi-stylus pickup, like a record player, that would play video off of a record. The video disc format wasn't actually digital. It actually had a stylus you had to replace. If you like stuff like this, there's a book I have called A Century of Wonders, 100 Years of Popular Science. I don't think it was reprinted. You can pretty much only get it used. But A Century of Wonders, 100 Years of Popular Science is a great book if you like this type of stuff. Aaron says he had a Bearcat scanner. You could put the different crystals in. Yeah, well, that's what they all were up until the point that Bearcat, Tenelec, and I forget who there were 3 companies, I think, that pretty much came out with programmable scanners around the same time. And the only other non-crystal scanner that was made was General Electric. General Electric made one where you had these 4 little tiny tuning knobs. You would press a button next to the tuning knob, and the frequency would display on actually a meter, almost like a single strength meter. And you would tune that little tiny tuning knob until you got a frequency you wanted to keep, and you left it there. And then you'd go to the next one and do the same thing. When you were done, you had 4 programmed channels. It was still analog, so it could drift. You had to tweak it every now and then, but it was an interesting take on that technology. All right. Do we have any late check-ins for the OMARC Science and Technology Net? Please come now. Someone's just trying to fool me. They're watching my face, want to see the expression. Anyway, all right, Jim, wrap up of what we heard so far, and I'm going to try to send some links here to Paul and Aaron.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, lots of catch up. K2BHM. Yeah, pagers and cell phones. I have a different place in my heart for them. Back when I was a kid in high school and all of us were playing around on CDs, Channel 23 was infamous. We were limited to 5 watts, which they typically made like 4.5 to give you some wiggle room so you didn't go illegal. But pagers for Albany Memorial Hospital were on Channel 23 because that was authorized for other services. And they would poke out like 50 watts. You had to get down into the basement, sub-basement, stuff like that. And it was strictly tones back then. So you'd hear beep, 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 beep. And it would just basically make the pager beep, and you would call the operator. But that made Channel 23 pretty much unusable. And also along that line, that was a radio control frequency for model airplanes. So you didn't want to get anywhere near Albany because your airplane could start doing weird things every time a pager went off. So that was my first introduction to pagers. Can you drop a second? So I got back into them again a little later on when I started doing field service work in the medical industry, a pager and a cell phone. They became what was known as a leash. No matter where you were or what you were doing, they could get you at a second's notice, demand you call them right back, and send you off on a wild goose chase, God knows where. You could be doing something in Danbury, Connecticut, have to wrap it up as quick as you can, and skedaddle on off to Syracuse or Rochester. So, yeah. Cell phones and beepers had a very bad place in my heart for quite some time. And it took a while to get over it until it got to the point of where I realized that now it's my time. So when the cell phone goes off, it's like, hey, you want to go someplace for lunch? So that it took that to change things. Let me drop again. Then we got on talking about transistors, smaller and smaller and smaller. I did a lot of work with Sony, running a machine shop, supporting the tools, the actual chip manufacturing equipment that would do the photolithograph and so forth to make the multi-layers and so forth. And the quest to get smaller and smaller got to the point of where light was too crude and too program to deal with. So I started working with ASML from Holland, Netherlands, and they were doing EUV. We bought a machine that came through on, I think it was 7 tractor trailer loads, and the optics for it alone was $25 million. And it didn't paint with light, it painted with extreme ultraviolet light. So you get a much finer detail and much smaller resolution on the wafers. So that was amazing. And let's pick up another topic. Let me drop. SDRs, software-defined radios. Actually kind of got its start back in the 80s when I was working for the federal government. A particular machine that I was working on improving and renovating and so forth was a lathe that had an instrumented head, and it would pick up signals, error signals from accelerometer, and feed it into a analog system that would generate a correction. And it was at 3 hertz, roughly, give or take, depending on the speed of the machine. And analog devices had a module, solid-state module about the size of a pack of cigarettes, that was a filter. And that could take millivolts of 3 hertz and 15 volts of noise and pull that 3 hertz out enough to amplify it and generate a correction signal and control the cutting path of the head. So that was amazing. And then we got one better. Let me drop again. Analog devices came up with an industrial computer running Maxim Basic, and this analog filter could now be implemented in software in this computer back in 1980 something, and that was the basis of the next generation machines. All the analog stuff went out the window and it went to computers, and that was astonishing for back then. And then you were talking about scanners, Bearcats. I think it was Bearcat. Their first digital came out, and it had what we affectionately referred to as combs. An aluminum piece that looked like a comb, and you would break teeth off, and then plug the thing in, and the missing teeth versus the present teeth would program the synthesizer to put it on the frequency you wanted. And you bought it with a package of combs instead of a box of crystals. So, anyhow, back to you, Neil. K2BHM.
Thanks, Jim. And the one that I had not long ago, it came in just a pile of scanners I bought from a guy in New Jersey with a bunch of other stuff. It was like a lot of radios that he was selling on Craigslist, and it was a lot more than he had pictures of online. We filled the car with radios, and one of them, I thought it was a crystal scanner because it had the switches across the front that all the Bearcat crystal controlled scanners always had, and lights. And I popped it open because there was also a couple of sandwich bags filled with crystals. Figured I'd run through them and see if there was anything useful frequency-wise for our area. But when I opened it up, there were only like 2 or 3 crystals inside of the thing. No place to put them. Like, well, that's weird. So I opened up the bottom, and still nothing. And then I'm staring at it, and I'm realizing 16 channels, 16 bits, binary. And that's when I realized that it was a programmable scanner, and I managed to find a copy of the manual online, and they had most of the manual was a frequency conversion chart. And basically, you looked up the frequency you wanted, and it gave you frequencies, and it was basically, it was a VHF low, VHF high scanner. I think that's all it picked up. I don't think it did UHF. just VHF low, VHF high. And you looked up the frequency in the table, and then it gave you the switch settings for that frequency. So you put it in program mode, and then you flipped 16 switches, up, 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 down, down, up, down, up, down, up, 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 down, and so on. And then there was a momentary switch that you pressed. The machine would blink like 2 or 3 times, and then you took it out of programming mode, and that channel was programmed. But it only had the public service ranges of the frequencies in the guide. It was capable of receiving ham radio 2 meter stuff, and I think it stretched to 6 meters as well. But to do it, it had a conversion. Instead of looking it up in the table, it had a mathematical formula, and it was basically binary conversion. If any of you have ever done that, you take a number and you divide it by 2, and you keep dividing it by 2, and you keep writing the remainders. I'm trying to remember exactly how it works. You eventually end up with the binary number out of the product. I'd have to sit down with a piece of paper to remember the exact process, but I remembered enough of it at that point that I'm like, I can do this. So I sat down with some of my favorite repeater frequencies and was able to program them into the thing. And it worked. I was able to pick up the local repeaters on it. Neat. But definitely the Tenelec with its keypad was a lot more useful. All right, let me drop. This is W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a 73 round. We're just going to go around one more time. Mike checked out, so he won't be with us for the final round. But we have a question on our final round. And we've talked about your favorite communications devices you own of all time and your favorite new technology that you've ever seen announced or read about. What is a technology that you want? Something that doesn't exist. What do you want the most? What can't we do now that you want to be able to do? And this can be as crazy as you want, but what is your favorite technology that you wish existed? And this will be our final round, folks. So let me throw it over to Jim, K2BHM.
Oh, wow. That can be dangerous. Wow. Looking back, Star Trek, they had a communicator. And next thing you know, Motorola makes the flip phone. Our transporters on the horizon. Is somebody going to be able to take molecular atoms and so forth and so on and recreate them from a map over in some other location? That's out there. That would be interesting. I don't want to be the first one to try it, but then again, I don't think I'll be around for that. So, whatever. Back to you, Neil, K2BHM.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah. Shades of the movie The Fly.
I don't think I saw that one.
Couple versions, definitely. Yeah. Vincent Price version and the Jeff Goldblum version. But yeah, transport technology going wrong.
Okay, so the fly in the ointment.
Yeah, and in this case, a fly in the machine. Which, if you really take apart the technology at that point, then you have to start asking, well, why didn't it combine his DNA with, bacteria and, mold spores that are living on his surface of his skin, or those little tiny mites that live in your eyelash roots? I mean, like a lot of sci-fi, it sometimes doesn't stand the test of scientific scrutiny.
Well, that's what filters are for. You were talking earlier about 3D printing ICs and stuff like that. So halfway there.
Well, that would be slow transmission. So the first transporters are going to be like radio facsimile or slow scan TV. You'll load yourself into something, and then you're going to 3D print on the other end of it. The problem with that is technically that you would end up with two people, and I guess they'd have to verify that the new one was complete and exact, and then destroy the old one, right? Definitely some legal issues there.
I could see a big problem with that if we start putting politicians in there and they can recreate themselves and not delete the old copies. We could be overrun.
Here you go, folks. Here's President Gates and Vice President Gates and Speaker of the House Gates and Head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Gates.
Exactly. When you got that much money, who knows what could happen.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Jim. And thanks for being here tonight. Matt, what do you want?
Well, again, we go back to Star Trek. But if you remember, slap a couple of anti-grav units on it, Scotty. I want anti-grav units. I want those really neat engineering things that they have. You can, slap two of them on a chunk, a 5,000-pound chunk of lead, and just walk it down the hall. That's I want those. 73s, everybody, and great net. Good to hear everything, and have a good evening. KB2 GGF.
All right, Matt. Thanks for stopping by. Good one, and it gets my mind going because just the idea in these groups. When we watch science fiction, when we read science fiction books, the ability to manipulate physical properties like gravity and inertia, and you'll hear these terms when you read the books and you watch the movies. Artificial gravity, in addition to anti-gravity, and inertial dampeners. That's a term you hear in so many of these shows and movies, and it's interesting stuff. We can't really do that yet. I don't know where we are with it, but it's it would be interesting if we can do it someday. I've mentioned this before as well. One of the things I liked about the book series, and of course the TV show that followed, The Expanse, was that it showed a future where we don't have that stuff. And that's the thing, when you watch Star Trek and Star Wars and so much science fiction, they get on these spaceships and they travel faster than light, and gravity doesn't rip them to shreds, and they don't have to worry about inertia when they're going really fast. But we don't know how to do that. And the Expanse novels kind of look at the universe that way, in that we don't know how to do it. So it takes a while to get from point A to point B. And if we're going to travel anywhere near the speed of light, which they can't get that close, there's all sorts of tricks, crazy couches they sit in, and they get injected with all sorts of drugs so they can actually stand up to the incredible G-forces that they're taking in, and all sorts of things like that.
Quick question.
Sure, go ahead.
What's the possibility of COVID-19 being the reincarnation of Tribbles?
There's, if you're a real Star Trek fan, and you study the Star Trek canon, there's some interesting stuff about things like that, where Tribbles came from, and why they breed the way they do, and there's actually a backstory on that in one of the episodes, where they were trying to engineer, I think, a food source for some planet, and something got messed up. Interesting, you should bring that up.
It just popped to seem like a likely corollary because everything that we're talking about now is invented from what was presented on Star Trek.
There's a lot that grew out of that, but there's a lot of other sci-fi as well. Star Trek drew on other things as well. But in this particular one, yeah, I recommend it. Read the books or watch the show, The Expanse, because we can't control gravity, and that's another issue of the book, is that we've raised a whole society in low gravity that can never visit Earth because they can't deal with the gravity. Creates social issues. Anyway, but good stuff though. Thanks, Matt. Lou, favorite technology that you want?
Okay, Neil. You read that? Let me know.
Yeah, you're coming in fine, Lou.
Okay. I think what I would really like to see, and I know they're out there already, but I guess for the typical homeowner would be a fuel cell that everybody can basically, power their own homes, heat their own homes, because I guess the byproduct or whatever. I mean, it does create heat. It also creates water, but you can create electricity with it. And I remember seeing years ago something either in Popular Science or Popular Mechanics where they were talking about that, making your home run off a fuel cell and basically be self-sufficient. I mean, I know that the oil companies will be screaming and everything because they won't be able to get a cut of it, but I'm sure they'd find a way to get, or get a cut of it one way or another. But that's what I would like to see. I would like to see a self-sufficient home, so we're not at the mercy of power grids when storms come, and basically not at the mercy of oil and gas companies, I guess. So when winters come around and we need heat, or even in the summer, electricity for air conditioning, I mean, we'd be self-sufficient. That's kind of a dream, but they're out there. We just got to get them down. I mean, from what I see now, they're probably around the $30,000 to $40,000 range. But if we can get them cheaper, or somebody to mass produce them cheaper, then I'm sure the Chinese will come up with a cheaper version of it somehow. Back to you, Neil. KD2TVS.
Well, thanks, Lou. And that's a cool one, and it's kind of related to my choice, which we'll get to. But Aaron comments that Google is using fuel cells already, about the size of a brick. Sounds interesting. I might want to look that one up. But yeah, it's, obviously there's been over the years a lot of technologies like this that large corporations don't really want to hear about, but eventually everything comes to the surface. So definitely something to watch. All right. Thanks, Lou. Paul, I'm going to throw it over to you, N3EYQ. You already typed one on here, but I don't know if that's your final answer.
Well, I did throw transporters in there, and of course the 1.21 gigawatts of time travel, but I'm not sure. Science fiction kind of throws everything helter-skelter. So a lot of, like you said, Star Trek things and time travel and all this other stuff. If we look at the every time you get up near the speed of light, you're actually time traveling according to our current rules and regulations. So, God only knows. But I still want one of them locomotives. N3 UIQ.
Yeah, that thing was pretty cool. And Aaron has been on the chat, and he said, first of all, Jim, he wanted to comment that supposedly they have a transporter already. I know that they acknowledge that the technology could work, but I'd be curious to see what they've been able to send. A hamburger, a flea. I imagine it's possible. So, in some realm. But Aaron says something he'd like to design is an SDR with unlimited slices. So it's funny you should say that, because I think it was earlier this year, or maybe the end of last year, there was an article about what quantum computing would do to SDR. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Net. Basically, they were talking about being able to sample, like the entire radio spectrum at once and process it. Definitely give us unlimited capability with it. And we're still at the dawn of quantum computing, so it's going to get interesting. All right, so we're up to me. There's a lot of things I'd like to have, and you've all mentioned things that are just fantastic. But I want the world to be a better place. I'd like to see some of these things before I leave this world. And but I would like the world to be a better place for my kids, my grandkids, and my great-grandkids. And one of the interesting things, if you study history and how technology applies itself to the world and social situations and the growth of population and our ability to actually feed the world and keep people happy. Throughout history, the world has grown to a certain point and sometimes stalled, whether it's because we couldn't grow anymore physically, or we couldn't keep the people fed and alive and housed, But one of the biggest points in history, when you look back at how technology affects population and social situations, one of the biggest points is the discovery of petroleum and its refinement. It got us over a hurdle, population-wise. And it's been the driving force of our industry. So much of what we do is based on petroleum. Even now, as larger cities like New York City are trying to say, well, you can't build any new buildings that use fossil fuels for heat. But we're not there yet. We're not ready yet, because a lot of our electricity, which is the alternative that they're offering, a lot of our electricity is still coming from fossil fuels. One of my favorite, funny pictures, but in a way it actually is true, is of, the Tesla or other electric car, recharging its battery, and the charger is sitting next to a large diesel generator. That's a, gross interpretation of what I'm saying, but, it's still there. And it was fossil fuels that allowed us to have the airplanes and the aircraft that we have, and the fossil fuels that allowed us to ship things across the ocean at any decent kind of speed and safety, and power our locomotives and truck things all around the country. And the world runs on oil products. We're getting glimpses of other things we can do, but it's still small potatoes. So I want something that's going to be the next rung on that ladder, the thing that allows us to hit the next stage of growth. And I don't know what it's going to be. I can give you one possibility, and Lou mentioned fuel cells. I'm going to say cold fusion, because I think that or something like it is the next step. And it's going to completely change the way the world works. And it's not going to happen overnight, because as more than one person has mentioned, large corporations don't want it because it hurts them. But the smart ones that know that the technology is coming or are working on it will diversify and invest. And it's going to take a while for it to filter out to everybody in the whole world to be able to take advantage of something like it. But like I said, it's not necessarily cold fusion that would be the technology, but that's one example. It could be some incredible advancement and invention in solar technology that makes solar hundreds of times more efficient than it is now. It could be something like that. But that next rung on the energy ladder is what I'm talking about. And I do have one other thing I'd love to see. Definitely also change things. Not necessarily all for the good, but in a lot of science fiction, there is the device sometimes called the fabricator, or there's a few other names it has. In Star Trek, it's like the food replicator, which allows them to create any kind of food that you want. But there's also just replicators in a lot of these science fiction stories that can create things, objects. They don't weave clothing, they create it out of these replicators. All right, we have 3D printing technology. We have CNC technology, digital CNCs. We have the ability to do 3D printing at the molecular level. There is a lot of ways you could combine those technologies. And then, of course, if the transporter was actually a thing, you can actually use similar technology to actually synthesize matter. All of these technologies together might be able to create the fabricator, or as one of my wife's favorite novels, the cornucopia machine. It's definitely another thing that would change the world, change society, allow us to do a lot of things. But I'm looking for that next rung on the energy ladder for sure. Aaron's last comment here was nanobacterial fuel cell. Okay, I'll have to look that one up. Yeah, the chat is getting spammed again. Goodbye. And he's gone. So that's it. Let's see if there is a last minute before we hang up. Check it. Jerry, welcome. Have you been listening tonight?
Yeah, off and on. Dinner became available just at the time the net was beginning, so I've been stuffing face mostly. A couple of comments here before I forget them, or maybe I will anyway. The Santa Claus machine was another label for the 3D printers or whatever, the replicators. And a cautionary word, your next level of technology for energy delivery, you're talking about maybe cold fusion or whatever. Governments do not want a technology available to anyone, except maybe themselves, that can provide a large amount of energy quickly. Think about it.
No, I kind of get it. There's been some books written on that subject as well. Major advances in technology can cause huge social issues.
Yes, agree. And for those just flown out the other ear. WA2 RKN.
W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Night. Yeah, and I'll add to that because none of this comes without problem. There was a primetime TV show that explored this subject. It didn't last. It didn't make it. But I loved the premise, which was as technology advances and we're able to do almost anything, so too are the criminals able. And we talk about a convergence. What's the word? What is the word? Help me. The singularity. That's the word I was looking for. This is something that Ray Kurzweil speaks of. He's a futurist. And the singularity is that point where technology makes us almost limitless. The ability to download your brain into a computer, let's say. But there's another technology people would want, right? That particular word can mean a lot of different things. And what the show explored was that there was a singularity in technology and social situations that would advance the world. But what we always forget is that there's the dark side of it also, and that there was also a singularity in crime and the illegal part of everything. So that if we can produce perfect replications of things, we could replicate almost anything, including money, which is a reason for moving to something digital. But think about, how far can technology march before we have to deal with the negative side of it as well? And it's a good thing to remember. Thank you, Jerry. I'll throw it back to you for final comment.
Don't really have one, so just enjoy the net. Thanks for running it. WA2 RKN, back to net.
You're very welcome, Jerry, and feel free to stop by again. Jim, final wrap up.
Oh, God, you got me wrapped up all right. It's the OK2BHM. First off, fuel cells. Old technology. They've been here for decades. NASA used them commercially in satellites and stuff like that, whatever. But a company called MTI here in Latham, New York, just a little north of us, branched off to a company called Plug Power, who has been working for years on developing and improving fuel cells for small commercial and residential applications. Runs off of natural gas, gives you electricity, and heat and water as an output. And they keep on going up and down on the Dow Exchange or whatever, stock price-wise. They do a breakthrough and then a setback and a breakthrough and a setback. But they're still alive and still working on it, so who knows what's going to come out of that. Let me drop a second. Yeah, so anyhow, and the quest to go greener and greener and greener, we are pushing everybody towards electric vehicles. And I think the latest rumors on the rumor mill now is that as of 2024, any new housing will have to have heat pumps as a source of electricity or source of heat. You won't be able to use oil or natural gas or propane as a fuel source to heat your home anymore. And by, I think they were targeting 2030, anything that had to be replaced with a heat pump. So we're looking at cars and home heating being tacked on to our electric grid. And correct me if I'm wrong, but on a hot summer day now, they tell you that you got to shut down your air conditioning so the grid doesn't go into shutdown and have rotating brownouts. So what are they going to do now with that grid when all of a sudden everybody comes home now and turns on their heat pump and plugs in their car, which could take upwards of 20, 30, 40 amps on 220. You got a Tesla, maybe even 50. Because you want to go and hurry up and charge and get out to go to dinner and a movie and all that. We're going to bring the grid down to its knees. So that's something to think about that we haven't planned. And you drop again. And all of these grids are on the net, open to hacking from external criminals. Like we were talking, as technology increases, the opportunity for criminals increases as well. And we know that that can't possibly happen. I mean, geez, what Medicare Advantage plan do you have now? I can save you dollars. I can put money in your pocket and save you all kinds of, and we'll even come pick you up and oh, by the way, your car, your warranty's about to expire. You need to buy our insurance program. Yeah, okay. Tell me about it. Yeah. Anyhow, back to you, Neil. K2BHM.
So you need a better electric grid to do all this stuff. Let's move to Texas. Oh, wait. Yeah, we're not ready. You know, I don't disagree with wanting to be green. I don't disagree with it at all. You know, and we can definitely build some things into our required house design and make them more efficient. You know, little cute cues on the designs that bring passive solar technology into home design and things that we can actually do. But as far as, leaning more on the electric grid before we make that a better source, no, we're not ready. We're not there. Not there yet. So some of this will happen. Definitely. But I think it's, New York pushing this and some other states pushing it along, and we're not ready. So it's good points, Jim. Anything else before we say goodnight?
Yeah, I saved the best one for last. Let's see if I got it. Our hobby is based a lot on the sun. Sunspots and solar flares and stuff like that generate charged particles in the ionosphere, which modify the way radio waves can bounce back and where they bounce and how they bounce and so forth and so on. But when you have a much more dramatic effect, that high ionization level can start to interfere with electronics. And every so often, every couple centuries or so, it's been reported that rumor has it that there's a intense solar flare, which is of a proportion that could knock out all of our satellites and all of our communications, all of our grids and stuff like that. So it's theory because we weren't around back then to test it, but it is indeed possible. And from the military standpoint and the stuff I've done in the past to harden military vehicles, we haven't worried about that in the commercial line. A nuclear warhead could produce a magnetic pulse, but so could a solar flare. So, and we haven't prepared for that. We might be in for a rude awakening. Back to you, Neil, K2BHM.
W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Night. And yes, and there's a collection of science fiction novels based on that subject as well. I'm not going to say end of the world story, but definitely, the post-apocalyptic type of book. It's scary. It really is. And no, we're not ready. We're not ready for a lot of things, as has been demonstrated. Thanks, Jim. And thank you all for checking in tonight. Let's close things up. You have been listening and or watching to the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. This net meets every Sunday night at 8 p.m. on the repeater of the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club and is also streamed on YouTube via my YouTube channel, which can be found by searching for W2NDG Science and Technology on Google. W2NDG Science and Technology. The repeater that holds this net is owned and operated by the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club on a frequency of 146.805 with a negative shift of 600 kilohertz and a PL tone of 103.5. Probably should have announced that at the beginning of the net. But most of you found your way here. Feel free to join us for the other nets that occur on this repeater. And they are as follows. Every weekday morning, every morning of the week, not just weekdays, 8:35 a.m., we bring you the 8:35 on the 8:05 roundtable discussion. This is a casual roundtable net, not a directed net. Started at the beginning of the pandemic to keep hams in touch and make us realize that we like being social. As Paul says on the net frequently, ham radio is the original social media. It keeps us in touch, and it was a welcome thing at the beginning of the pandemic when a lot of us were not really quite prepared for what was coming. And the net continues to this day, 8:35 a.m. on this repeater. Every evening at 6:30 is the 6:30 check-in net. Net with the same purpose as the 8:35, just hams getting in touch with each other, making sure that we stay in touch and we kind of let on what we did during the day. Do we need anything? Do we have any questions? Do we find something that somebody else needs? Just people helping people. And that's a directed net, but still casual, every 6:30 p.m. on this repeater. On Monday nights is Undernet, the Ulster Northern Duchess Readiness Net. A net with hams getting ready for the possibility of needing to perform emergency communications. We are not at this time affiliated with any of the ham radio emergency communications groups, but we are looking in that direction. So for now, we're just getting people used to the technology, the terminology, and the ability to be able to communicate in an emergency and what you would need. And that's every Monday night at 8 p.m. Every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m., not on this repeater, but on HF, on 3835 kilohertz is the new Hudson Valley HF net. And that's every Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 p.m. on 3835 kilohertz, or possibly 5 or 10 kilohertz up if the frequency is occupied. That's 4:30 p.m. and that's run like your typical HF nets once a week, 4:30 on Wednesdays. Every Thursday night at 8 o'clock, Dave, K2JLV, our club president, hosts the Thursday Night Technical Net, more of a ham radio or computers and ham radio oriented net. Dave takes check-ins and looks for a subject, either somebody who has a general question or a troubleshooting issue. If a subject doesn't develop in the first round, then Dave spins the topic wheel and comes up with a subject for us. Great net, sometimes runs 4 or 5 rounds into the night. Solved many a technical issue and answered many technical questions. Join us on Thursdays at 8 p.m. for that. And of course, we'll be back here next Sunday at 8 p.m. for next week's OMARC Science and Technology Net. We now return the repeater to its regular use. As usual, I'll hang out for a few minutes, not too long tonight because it's a little later than normal, but I'm going to end the YouTube stream right now. So thank you for all our YouTubians for checking in, and anybody who's watching this after the fact, thank you for supporting us.